Excellent work. We set up everything for the single product in our context as well as the reducer. So now I think I'm going to close all the files as well as the folders, and we'll simply go back to the context. And in the context, in the product context, I would want to pass that function down. So fetch single product, I would want to pass it down. That's why I'll pass it into the value. So say here, fetch single product. So now, of course, I can access that function. And now I would want to navigate to the pages, and I'm looking for that single product page. Now we do have a bunch of imports. We have use effect. Since, like I said, we'll invoke this fetch single product when we load the single page product page. And then we've got some use params and use history. Don't worry, I'll cover these hooks once we get there. And they're both are coming from React Router DOM. Then also I would want to get the link from React Router DOM as well as styled components. That's why we have styled. We have this single product URL, because remember in the constants, in the utils first of all, and then in the constants, I had that single product URL. So this is the URL, the root URL, all the way up to the ID. And then what we're doing, each and every time we navigate to single product, we'll just grab that ID and then add it to this URL, and then we'll be able to fetch the product. Again, let me navigate here. For some reason, I closed my single product. Then also I have format price, since we already covered that we're getting price in cents. And then we have quite a few components. So some of them are going to be while we're loading. One is going to be for the error. But then if we navigate to a complete project, notice the single product page is somewhat big and complicated. So I would want to set up separate component for these images. I would want to set up separate component for the stars, as well as the colors and add to cart functionality. So this is going to be the case where I would really want to split it up in multiple components. And we'll also have to redo a little bit of our page hero, because if you pay attention, notice how for the products or about or whatever, we have only two. But then if we navigate to that single product, we have two links. So home and products, and then the name of the product. So let's first start by setting up the loading, by setting up the error, as well as the use effect. So we're going to navigate back. We have all the components, like I said, that we're going to use, and we have styled, we have link. And now I'm going to go inside of the component, and I first start by getting the ID. And remember, with React Router DOM, in order to access the URL parameters, we needed a hook, correct? And the name of the hook was use params. So if you want, you can console log the whole thing, and you'll see that there's going to be an object with a property of ID, just because in the app, that's how I named it. So I'm going to go to the console, and there it is. I have my object, and then in the object, I have ID property with this value. So of course, I would want to attach this one to my URL, correct? And then I'll be able to fetch the product. So I'll set up my ID here. I'm going to say const the ID is equal to use params. Now I do need to destructure it. That's why I'll close it in the curly braces. So now what I'm saying is get me the ID property out of this object, the one that we can see in the console. And then I also would want to grab some things from use product context. So first of all, I would want to get the loading error as well as the product, whatever it is. Remember, initially it's going to be just an empty object, and then the function fetch single product. So we're going to go with const, and let's say single product, single underscore product, and then remember loading. And I'll right away again give it an alias of just loading. Then we're going to look for single underscore product underscore error, and we're going to give it a alias of error. And then of course we have single underscore product is equal to a product. So again, we have some kind of alias. And lastly, let's just get that fetch single, and then product. Now, all of this is coming from my hook. So I just invoke it. And now let's set up the use effect first. So what I would want is when I load this component, when I load this page, I would want to invoke use effect and set up my fetch single product. Now, of course, I'll have to pass in this URL that is coming from my contents plus the ID. Then I'll be able to access the product, correct? So we're going to set up over here and say use effect, and then we would want to invoke it when the component mounts. So that's why I will just pass in empty dependency array. And if you want, we can add ID over here. So as the ID changes, then we would just fetch that new product. That's also an option. So I'm going to go with fetch single product. And then two things that I would want to pass in. I'll pass in the URL that is coming from my constants. And the second thing is the ID, like so. So now, of course, if I want, I can console the product. So first of all, remember, product should be empty. Notice I have two empty objects, meaning it just runs twice. And then eventually, of course, I get my single product. So in this case, I will navigate to the bigger page because I would want you to see how the properties look like. So let's go over here, notice the ID, and notice the console, where of course, this is my object. So of course, we'll have to pull out these properties in order to showcase something. But if you can see the object with these properties, we are already in good shape. So I have my product. Awesome. Now what? Well, now I also would want to check for loading as well as the error, correct? So let's go with simple if loading is true, then we have the loading component. Remember, we set it up when we worked on the feature products. So say loading. So that's going to be, of course, displayed when we're loading. Then also there's going to be for error. And I'm going to show you error in the second. So let's go with return and then error. And in order to test out the error, we simply add, I don't know, S in front of the URL. And what you should see is that there was a error. So that's, of course, our component. And technically, we could leave it the way it is. If there is an error, we just display the error. But I think a better solution would be setting up the automatic navigation, meaning this is going to be done programmatically. Instead of just displaying the link, I would want to navigate back to the homepage if there is an error, let's say in 3 seconds. How do we set that one up? Well, we'll have to set up one more use effect where I'm going to go with use effect. And for time being, it's just going to be empty dependency array, but eventually we will pass in the error. And I'm going to check if the error is true. So I'm going to say if error. So if the error is true, then I would want to set timeout, since I would want to happen in 3 seconds. And then remember, in the set timeout, we pass in callback function. And then the second thing is in how long we would want to navigate, meaning in how long we would want to run that callback function. So we have 3000 milliseconds, which of course is 3 seconds. And then in those 3 seconds, how we can programmatically navigate away from the page? Well, we can use history hook from React Router DOM. Now there's another way how we can navigate away from the page, and I'll show you that when we work with Auth0. Keep in mind there's two. There's one with redirect and one with use history hook. So in this case, we'll take a look at the history, and then the other one will be redirect. And we simply set up the history is equal to the use history hook. So now we get the history back from the React Router DOM. And the method we're looking on this history object is push. So this will set up the programmatic navigation. And I'm going to look for my use effect. And then in the set timeout, just go with history. And like I said, the method name was push. And now we just need to come up with a destination. So in this case, in 3 seconds, I would want to programmatically navigate to the homepage. So I'll save, and you'll notice that it doesn't happen. Why? Well, because we need to understand that by default, this error, remember, will be false. By the way, if you want, you can console log it. You'll see that error is false. That's why I said that we would need to add that error in dependency array. Because remember, when we start fetching, error is false. But then once we're done loading, and then once we can see that there's an error, then of course we set up error to be true. So once I add it here, notice the initial value will be, of course, false, but then eventually it's going to be true. So then in 3 seconds, we nicely navigate away. So we nicely navigate to the homepage. Again, it is optional. If you want to leave the error, you can definitely do so. But you also have an option of programmatically navigating using React Router DOM. Remember, there's two cases how we can do that. One using history, and then the other one is redirect, which we'll cover a bit later. So now, of course, we're at the point where we can successfully get the product. I just need to remove the S, and now we need to focus on our return. So I'm gonna, I guess, set it up on a small screen as well. So I'm gonna say here I would want to navigate, and we should see this single product page, because now we're at the point where we would need to set up our return.